All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Monday, March 17th, 2025. We're on voting list number 16, and we're going to start off with Senate Bill 154.
Senate Bill 154 was primarily assigned to Budget and Taxation, who voted it favorable with amendments. As introduced, the bill makes permanent the requirements for the comptroller to distribute $14 million annually from the state's unclaimed property fund to the Access to Counsel and Eviction Special Fund, and the governor to include in the annual budget bill for each fiscal year an appropriation of $14 million from the special fund to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. The bill also terminated the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force. You should have a reprint in your packet about what the Budget and Taxation Committee, what their amendments did. So instead of making both those distributions permanent, they just extended it through 2028. And instead of terminating the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, the amendment makes changes to staff and duties of the task force, which essentially moves those responsibilities from the Office of the Attorney General to the Department of Housing and Community Development. It also adds that the 3 members of the task force that are required to be tenants with income under a certain level can now receive reasonable compensation as determined by the Secretary of Housing and Community Development, and it makes the task force last report due on January 1st, 2026, and makes the overall effective date of the bill June 1st, 2025.
All right, so, there are no amendments before us. Those were amendments that were put on in B&T, or those?
Yeah, it was passed by B&T. They should have been the packet.
I'm sorry?
They should have been in the packet.
Yeah, it's getting distributed right now. Senator West, go ahead.
I don't have it, but where's the money coming from?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you need a copy?
Is that the, yes, okay, thank you.
Just as we're passing out this, I just wanted to add something to this discussion. We've had a lot of talk this cycle, really this particular legislative session about tenant rights and about changing the laws, and I think we need to do that. And I support a lot of those bills. But one of the things that came up in our briefing and in some of those bills is that even current law is inadequate if people don't have access to counsel. So as we go into the next legislative session after this, I'd encourage us to think, instead of changing some of the laws to provide some of the solutions that we think are necessary, that in fact this might be the solution, that giving people more access to counsel to effectuate current law what might be a more fruitful opportunity. So not on the bill, but I just want to put that out there as people think about what's happening going forward.
I couldn't agree more too, and let me add that the problem in the past has been attempts to force the landlords to pay for counsel. This is the solution that we've needed to find all along, so I think this is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the money is coming from, you said, the abandoned property fund, and what was those monies used for before?
A couple years ago, I mean, it's used for a multitude of different things, but we took some money from it a couple of years ago and added access to counsel. So we've been using this money for access to counsel for at least 3 or 4 years, yeah.
So we're already allowing for this to happen.
On a year-by-year basis.
Yeah, exactly.
And how much is in this abandoned property fund? Annual? Well, I am, and it's not showing that.
This isn't a new money coming in. This is the same money.
Yeah, I understand,
Okay.
but we're also in a time where we're in some pretty serious fiscal constraints and where we should be and could be cutting back some areas. And this seems to be, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, that one of these, here again, we're not cutting anything. We're just moving money around and adding more taxes and fees. So I'm just curious how much money was in the account and we're just moving it. You're saying we already have access to it, but I don't see that in the note.
So we're not moving it, we're just authorizing it for a longer period of time instead of annually. But go ahead, John.
I'd say this is something that's already in place. This is already happening. The only thing, the bill originally was to make this permanent instead of doing this on short-term basis each time. The amendment is taking this back down to through 2028 instead of making it permanent, which is what the bill as introduced would have done.
Okay. All right, thank you. But we don't know how much money's in that fund. I don't see it
In the
anywhere.
unclaimed property fund, I don't have that information, but I can try to find it.
Okay, so there are no amendments. Does this have to go back
There
to?
is an amendment.
Or-
I just handed it out. 154, right
Well,
there.
this is the amendment that budget and tax passed with, because they are primary, JPR is
Okay,
secondary.
so do we need to adopt the amendment, or?
Yes,
Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a motion to adopt amendment 55324/1. All right. Is everyone okay adopting the amendment? All right, now the bill is before you as amended. Senator Sidnor.
Just hopefully council can help me because I'm quickly looking at this, but on bill page 6 of 7, line 11, it says a member of the task force described under subsection B2 of this section may receive reasonable compensation as determined by the Secretary of Housing and Community Development. B2 is, where am I missing? Who are they talking about?
That's, in my description, it's under currently the law and the task force. There are 3 members that have to be on the task force that have an income below a certain level. I believe it is like under 50% or something of the medium. But anyway, those 3 members, they're just saying that they can receive reasonable compensation, and that is determined by the secretary in that instance. The rest of the task force members do not receive compensation.
And who are the 3?
It's the 3 members that must be tenants whose income does not exceed 50% of the state median income adjusted for household size.
Okay,
It's on bill page 6, line 4.
gotcha. Thank you.
All right, now the bill's before you as amended. This is a motion for a favorable. All right, is everyone okay being recorded in the affirmative with the amended bill? Senator Fulton is down to access to counsel. Okay. Senator Fulton's down. You got it? All right. I don't know where he is. It's excused. I think it was the bathroom. Okay. It's final tally.
7-1.
All right. Senate Bill 154 as amended passes 7-1. All right, we now move on to Bill 977.
Senate Bill 977, as drafted, alters provisions related to the sharing of information with federal authorities for the purpose of immigration enforcement. There's amendment, and I think it may be easier if I walk through the amended bill. So the amendment, which is in your packet, is number 733928/1. The amended bill essentially has 3 parts. The first part, which begins at the bottom of the first page, is a provision being added to the business regulations article, which generally places restrictions on individuals who, or entities who receive state information which has personal information. And specifically, there are 2 new prohibitions being added. So on the second page, those are subsection C and D. So C is that a person in possession of a covered record, which is essentially a record created by the state which contains personal information, may not share or otherwise make available that record in exchange for anything of value or for the purposes of resale. And the second prohibition is that a person who obtains a covered record in exchange for anything of value may not share or otherwise make available the record for the purpose of immigration enforcement unless the person is presented with a valid judicial warrant or the covered record is otherwise made available to all members of the general public by the entity that created the record. The second portion of the bill is amending provisions in the Public Information Act. So this is expanding provisions that were enacted in 2021, that which generally prohibited the sharing of information with federal authorities for the purposes of immigration enforcement. And it's just striking the term federal agency and instead referring to person or governmental entity. So slightly expanding the application of those existing provisions. And then the third piece of the bill starts on page 3 of 5. This is also expanding provisions which were enacted in 2021, which created a similar prohibition on sharing information for the purposes of immigration enforcement to law enforcement entities which operated databases. So the amended bill would expand those provisions to also apply to databases operated by a unit of state or local government. And then finally, there's a reporting requirement in the amended bill that starts at the bottom of page 4 into page 5. That's for those units of state or local government who operate those databases to report on the frequency with which there are requests for information by the federal government.
So can we adopt the amendment just to work off the amended bill? Is that everyone okay with adopting the amendment? Okay, Senator West.
As I recall, when Mr. Ellison was here, the head of ICE in Maryland, did he not tell us that ICE didn't have any particular heartburn with respect to the other bill we passed about sensitive locations, but that this bill caused them a great deal of heartburn?
So I believe that's the case. And I think it's because you're going to deny, physical access to some of these spaces or actual access to, without a judicial warrant. I know, but I couldn't tell you. I'll let him articulate the reasoning, but yes, that's what I remember him telling me.
So what are we going to do if the federal government says you won't share resources with us, we won't share resources with you, and no longer will Maryland's law enforcement community have access to the FBI database of fingerprints and the rest?
I don't see that being the case. I see it being monetarily. I don't see that being that's what I was just saying. I mean,
I don't think that's in anyone's interest to for public safety. I don't see that being the constraint or the threat, but Senator Folden.
Yeah, I don't see that being the case. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just see that we're playing, State of Maryland's playing with fire because we receive a significant amount of federal funding. And if we do things that are contrary to what the rule of law is at the federal level and make decisions that would potentially be deemed as a sanctuary policy or decisions that are along the lines of a sanctuary policy, there are going to be consequences from the federal government. So I think that that's been clearly stated, and I believe, and that's exactly what Matt from ICE brought up, was that there would be not only consequences, but significant consequences. And here we are in a $3.3 billion deficit trying to work out of it. And the last thing we need to do is have the federal government say, you know what, I know we were going to pay 100% of the Key Bridge, but we're only able to afford 75%. And then the Maryland's on the hook for another $500 million through a simple decision. So I would urge extreme caution moving this measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two comments. The first, I think we're in a really tough spot because they could do that anyway. So when you're dealing with an unpredictable, irrational actor, who knows? You can kowtow to that person and do everything, and they can turn around and say, we're going to rip it from you anyway. Or you can live your values and see what happens. My question is, in the beginning, the letter C versus D. So C says a person in possession of a covered record may not share, but D says a person who obtains that record So how do those two work together? If you may not share it, how is somebody going to obtain it? What am I missing?
Yeah, so the C prohibition is broader, and it's sort of narrow and broader. It's narrower in the sense that it only applies if you obtained the covered record in exchange for something of value. So think like a data broker who's buying this kind of information for the purposes of resale. So it's narrower in that sense that it only applies if you obtained it for a thing of value, but it's broader in that you can't share it at all. So, sorry, C is broader in the sense that it applies whether or not you obtain the record in exchange for something of value. And it's narrower in that the prohibition only applies if you are then turning around and reselling the data. The D prohibition is only applies if you obtained it for a thing of value, and the prohibition is only on sharing it for the purposes of immigration enforcement. So it wouldn't matter whether you were selling it for the purpose of immigration enforcement or just giving it away for free. So those are two slightly separate prohibitions, and I believe the way they're constructed is to avoid any potential First Amendment issues. They're both kind of directed at commercial activity so that they would be considered, commercial speech restrictions. That, I think, is the purpose of, in C, limiting the prohibition to just being in exchange for selling it in exchange for a thing of value, and in D, limiting the prohibition to only if you obtained it for a thing of value.
But how can you obtain it for a thing of value if somebody can't share it for a thing of value?
Well, the obtaining would be from the state. You would have obtained it, for instance, you might have obtained it through PIA. And then the prohibition will kick in once an entity has received it from the state. And the prohibition is on sharing it with other private entities.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? All right, there's a motion for a favorable as amended. Let's do a roll call.
Vice Chair Waldstreicher,
Yes.
Senator Sidnor.
Yes.
Senator West,
No.
Senator Muse,
Yes.
Senator Folden,
No.
Senator Henson,
Yes.
Senator Love,
Yes.
Senator McKay,
Absolutely no.
Chairman Smith.
Yes. With the amendment 6-3. All right, we're going to go on to, so Senator West, for the LECs, Senate Bill 927, we did check with the Bar Association and Mr. Carlson, so thank you for that. There were some amendments that were proposed. Mostly, would you categorize them as technical, or?
So we're still reviewing, a lot of it is technical and meant to sort of eliminate confusion going forward. The amendment office is still working on a finalized consolidated amendment. So that's still in process for
But
us.
generally, no offense to the bill. I mean, there were some technical
I
changes.
wouldn't say that conclusively. I kind of want to dig into what the amendment office, finalizes.
So given that the amendments are in drafting and that they're not going to be ready before floor, I'd like to what I would do is, what the promise to you is to put those suggested amendments on the floor, but I'd like to advance the bill. And if that can't happen, then I will hold the bill, until we. So those amendments are still forthcoming. So I'd like to just move it, and if the amendments are not there, then I'll just hold it. How do you all feel about that? Okay. All right. So motions for favorable on Senate Bill 927. Is everyone okay being recorded in the affirmative? Yes. Excellent. All right. Stay tuned as to whether we come back. So, yes, Senator Folden.
I'm not okay with that. I mean, I'll talk to you on a sidebar about it.
Okay, yeah.
This is, I'm opposed.
Okay, excellent. Okay. All right. What's the final?
Oh, I'm sorry, 8-1.
8-1, Senate Bill 927 passes 8-1. Okay,